This is the Furlough Podcast, brought to you by All American Ford in Aniana, Alabama. Stop by and see John Makovica and his team today.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Furlough Podcast. We've been away for a couple of weeks with all this coronavirus going on, or COVID-19. On the show tonight, we have Rob Roselli, and what we're going to talk about is some of the crazy things that happen around, conspiracy theory, if you will. Are we paying attention to what's going on with the government? Are some of these things set up, or some of these things just in our head? Well, welcome aboard, Rob.
Hi, Chris. How are you? And thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm happy that you came on. Rob, for most people that don't know, Rob has written a few books, and he delves into paying attention to what our government and other agencies are doing. Rob, how'd you get into this?
Oh, that's a long story. We could probably spend time talking about that. But just going back to my college days, buddies, Christians, and we just started talking about stuff. And a lot of it, over time, I kind of forgot about because I didn't really want to think about it. But while I was in college, I did do a research paper on the AIDS virus at the time and came to the very unpopular conclusion that in all likelihood was probably man-made. And we can maybe circle back into that later on. But
yeah,
yes, I kind of went back to sleep like everybody else, and events and circumstances, probably brought me back front and center to the middle of the quote conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the broad brush of where I am today. And of course, just seeking the truth of what's really going on. Because as people are finding out more and more, it is certainly not coming from our so-called experts, our think tanks, academia, the so-called mainstream news, and this sort of thing. And let me just say this, Chris, and I'm not sure where these shows go, but most importantly, on my website, which is boxofsunglasses.com, in honor of my favorite movie, John Carpenter's They Live.
It's a great movie.
I emphasize God. Yeah, I emphasize God's simple salvation plan. People, no matter how awful or scary or whatever adjective you want to assign to it, depressing things get. Just knowing that the creator of the universe is in charge of this whole mess. That's, if people get one thing out of the show, whatever else they will think of me, and believe me, I've heard it all, and not most of it not good, but that's fine. I'm not doing this for fame, certainly financial. But anyway, that if they get one thing out of this, that is probably the most important for those listening right now, and just to keep that in mind, because a lot of the stuff we are seeing and that we'll talk about is can only be ascribed to the father of darkness, the ruler of this world, Matthew 4, Luke chapter 4, and the Lord over our so-called leaders, Satan himself. Start with that. People may think that's funny. They may laugh, and that's fine. If you don't believe that, then go listen to the evolutionists that that think the whole universe came from some infinitely small dot and just exploded out into everything from from blue whales to DNA. Anyway, so that's kind of the intro to where I am coming from.
So as far as digging deep and looking at all the big grand schemes of things, you definitely have a religious, faith, and that's good. I think everybody should have a faith in something, with whatever religion they fall into. But you said something that was kind of funny, really funny, but interesting, because I was looking at it earlier, and you were talking about things that man-made when you were in college, looking at the AIDS virus. And I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently things like AIDS has a patent on it. And and it was weird. I was reading something that says, how can it have a patent on it if it's not man-made? And and there's a couple other things like Ebola, SARS, different things of that nature. And I was curious, is it have you heard if it's those are natural things that somebody just wanted to take control of for the cures, or do you feel like there's something deeper? Even with this coronavirus, a lot of people aren't talking about the fact that the Harvard professor who was running, lab works and stuff, had dealings with Chinese students that were supposedly, allegedly, have something to do with the Wuhan area, and he quietly got thrown in jail here recently during all this mess, but they haven't keeping it to the forefront of mainstream media. Do you feel like those kind of things are interconnected?
Absolutely. And just going back to the AIDS virus, and of course, my opinion is very, very unpopular. I mean, you remember the story, some green monkey bit some native on the butt in the middle of Africa, and all of a sudden you had AIDS all over Africa. And not only in Africa, but amongst a very specific population in very specific areas in the United States. It was very, it was 5 cities. I think it was New York, LA, Chicago, and I don't remember the other two, but it was St. Louis and Miami, maybe, but whatever. But amongst the gay population. So the epidemiology never made any sense. And look, my background is civil engineering, and I did take some of these courses in college on math and microbiology. I don't profess to be the smartest guy in the world or that I'm some kind of expert, quote expert. So, people a lot smarter and a lot more knowledgeable than me would probably blast me to pieces, with verbiage that none of us understand. But, again, I take an Occam's razor approach to a lot of things. You just want to diverge for a second. I'll get right back to it. I mean, if you want to believe the same government, remember weapons of mass destruction. I did not have sex with that woman. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. And I'm not talking Republican and Democrat. You want to talk about the lies. I mean, carbon dioxide is a pollutant. We all came from slime. Radiation is the cure for cancer. We have to go into debt to get out of debt. I mean, talk about mathematical insanity. That's our Federal Reserve System. So, if you want to keep believing those quote experts, and again, all these Harvard wise guys with their 200 IQs and their, PhDs and all this, that's fine. Then this just probably isn't the place for you. And then, go run and listen to them, and that's fine. I can't stop you. But getting back to the point of what I was discussing, if you look at the epidemiology, it just popped out of nowhere. And then remember what the quote experts were telling us at the time, the green monkey thing. But based on my research, and I did a lot of research, there was nothing of any sort in any green monkey that matched the AIDS virus. What it was called a bovine leukemia virus and a sheep Visna virus. They were combined and they were adapted to specifically attack what's known as T4 cells in the human, which are basically like, you have white blood cells, and T4 cells are kind of produced as antibodies, and they kind of control the other white blood cells. And again, I'm not a virologist, but that's basically how it works. So if you just look at the circumstances, you have a strange virus never been seen in humans before. And viruses usually, they don't usually jump species. I mean, it happens. You get rabies virus, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's unusual, but okay. But there was a whole family of viruses, wasn't it? It was HTLV 1 through 5. And the HIV, what we commonly known as AIDS, HIV was HTLV3, I believe. And the point is, so you had 5 viruses in the family of viruses that all of a sudden jump species to humans, and it was all over Africa, and heterosexual population, and very concurrently amongst the specific gay population in the United States. And based on research I was able to find, it coincided with a World Health Organization smallpox vaccine in Africa and a hepatitis B vaccine program here in the United States. So things are starting to get very interesting. And then there was this big search for this patient zero, the person that spread it from Africa to the United States. And of course, they never found this person. And I came across an interesting story, I don't know, a few years ago, and I kind of brushed it off. The patient zero never really existed. The government finally determined 30 years on that there was no patient zero, so we still don't know where it came from. But of course, the government's not going to admit that.
Not in
So
our lifetime, right?
When you just look at it very technically and logically, it doesn't make any sense. It never did. Okay, now it's awful. And and people say, oh, how could that be? This, and I'm talking about the shadow government or whatever, even Fox News calls the deep state. Okay, what I call the un-American genocidal complex, with emphasis on genital. People need to remember. You think this country or people that run this country, not this country. This country that exists today. This isn't my country, but anyway, that's another story. But evil has existed since the Garden of Eden. If you go back to ancient history and empires, and the Hittites and the Assyrians, and fast forward after Christ, the Roman Empire, I mean, these are ruthless people of all ethnic persuasions and religions. Okay, nobody's really exempt. So then you come into the 20th century, the most bloody yet. I mean, you have Hitler, Mao, Stalin. So the will or the desire to carry on mass death on a mass scale, it has always been there. Okay, the human spirit. This has never happened. Humans, no, no. The people that control the world, at least, again, working for the father of lies directly, are perfectly capable of it and have done it, as we've seen over and over again. So that's not a valid argument. And a valid argument is, well, United States, elements within the government would never do this. And look, I mean, look at the abortion industry. Okay, you're against women's rights. Well, okay, whatever. But I just came across a story a few weeks ago. Okay, where a young woman went in for an abortion. The abortion doctor wasn't there. She had the baby right in the clinic, I think, in the waiting room. The baby came out alive. So the workers, in a panic, threw it into a biohazard bag. Okay,
Wow.
put a bunch of caustic chemicals in there in a bag and threw it on the roof of the building alive. Nobody was brought up
Holy
on murder.
shit.
So Chris, this is what I mean. Now that so we literally in this nation, whether you want to hear it or not, and whether Fox News is going to say it or not, how great America is. And again, I don't want to sound like all these anti-American hacks, these George Soros types, but the fact is that there are elements, there are people in this country that are perfectly capable of the same evil as, I say, Joseph Mengele or Adolf Hitler, or Klaus Barbie or any one of these people that Hitler had working for him. We have nothing on them. I mean that literally. So
Well,
the
we
will
embraced
is
a lot of
there.
those. We embraced a lot
Okay.
of them. We embraced a lot of them after World War II, bringing them in and making them part of our science programs and different and medical programs and stuff like that, just so the Russians wouldn't have them, right?
Well, that's part of it. And I can do better than that. I mean, as I document the un-American genocidal complex, whether you want to hear it or not, Adolf Hitler was an American creation. He had a lot of friends here in America before World War II. Okay, of course, IG Farben, which was basically a spinoff of Rockefeller Standard Oil, and Rockefeller was selling the Nazis oil and other industrial needs for their war machine all throughout World War II. I mean, this is historical fact. You don't hear about it a lot, but without IG Farben and Ford and some of these other places and DuPont, Zyklon B and the gases they use in the gas chambers, Hitler doesn't really exist. And one of his underlings, and Hitler, one of his best friends, besides the American, what was known as the American Eugenics Society as a whole, just the American Eugenics Society quickly they were social Darwinists. Okay, remember Darwin? There is no God, survival of the fittest. So killing off humans, known as morons, misfits, human weeds, imbeciles,
Or
was perfectly justified. They were called useless eaters. Okay, and one of Hitler's favorites was a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger. Okay, and Margaret Sanger's thing was, well, why are we wasting money and resources on people that are imbeciles and useless eaters? And I'm quoting her. Why don't we just kill them before they're born, especially the black ones?
yeah,
Okay,
she was over Planned Parenthood, right?
that's what I was getting at. That's Margaret Sanger. I mean, she had an organization called the American Birth Control League. Okay, she had correspondences with Adolf Hitler and his henchmen. She spoke in front of the Ku Klux Klan because they would love her for obvious reasons. What do we know today? The American Birth Control League is known today as Planned Parenthood. Okay, and this is, and if you look at today, even Planned Parenthood, the black population is disproportionately represented in poor urban neighborhoods. That's just historical fact, and that's the movement, the American Eugenics Society and related movements. That's where we got Planned Parenthood from. And these were people. They were putting black people into zoos and carnivals as proof of evolution. This was the forerunners to today's progressives. And who's the number one? I mean, who's leading the charge? Is Hillary Clinton collecting the Margaret Sanger Award, and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Just to go off on that segment, it simply amazes me that such a large percentage of the black population would vote for a party and listen and follow a party that literally either to see them, I mean that literally, or if they're not going to die, just sits around and collects welfare checks and votes for him every 4 years. That's what the liberal Democratic Party in this nation is. Okay. And again, I can only ascribe it to the pure evil of Satan himself. And I mean that literally when you really look into this stuff. Now, that's part one. Now just let's look at part two. We talk about the age and talk about the will to implement this or distribute it or disseminate it is certainly there. And then the technology. I mean, who's doing advanced genetic research and who's been doing it, longer than the United States? And the answer is nobody. I mean, people may not want to hear this, but again, this genetic research was an outgrowth of the American Eugenics Society and the social Darwinists and Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and the rest of them that literally wanted to control the world. They have no borders. They have no loyalty to any country. I mean, this is what it is. Carnegie and the rest of them. I mean,
Well, that's why they were all about open borders, right? I mean, the Federal Reserve and it's funny that, you mentioned that what is it? The Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and J.P. Morgan, against some people's push, they started the Federal Reserve, and it amazes me that a lot of people don't understand that the Federal Reserve is a private organization and it's not part of the government. And just because they put federal in front of it, it makes them seem like they are a government entity. But I would care to wager that at least 75% of the U.S. population doesn't realize that they're a private entity.
Well, I'm going to say it's probably more like 95%, and those 95% would laugh at people like ourselves that are just calling it out. And it's conspiracy groups and conspiracy theorists, and I've heard a lot worse, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't really care at this point. I only need to impress two people. One is the guy in the mirror, and one lived 2,000 years ago, and that's all I'm really worried about. But anyway, so to answer your question, yeah, the Federal Reserve System is at the core of this whole thing. Okay, now that's, if you want to just go off on that tangent a little bit, yeah, I mean, you go back to Matthew 21 and Jesus himself in John chapter 2, and the only people that he approached with physical violence and literally, I mean, he chased these guys out of the temple with whips were the money changers. Okay, and in my view, they're today they would be the reserve crowd. Okay, and I mean that from a figurative standpoint. I mean that from a literal standpoint. Okay, they have literally robbed the nation with the Federal Reserve System. It's not federal, okay, as you just mentioned, and there's no reserves. I mean, they create money out of nothing. So how could you have a reserve of nothing? It's just, it's almost as stupid as the evolutionists, right? That say we all came from nothing. There's no God. We just came into being. It's really that dumb. I mean, it's mathematically, and that's not conspiracy theory, Chris. I mean, that's just basic mathematical fact. I mean, you can't have a reserve if you're starting from that. You're starting from zero. It doesn't. It's just that's just basic fact. You know what I'm saying?
Some people said that they got the president of France, I believe it was, and hopefully I'm not saying this incorrectly, but got him in a war of words with Nixon, and that's why they wanted to get us off that gold reserve so that they could control internationally all the value of the dollar. And
yeah, well, I mean, Nixon. I mean, there was. I mean, initially, well, if you go back to the Constitution, I think it's Article 1, Section 8, I believe it is. If you go back, I mean, the United States monetary system is supposed to be tied to gold and silver. I mean, I don't remember the specific amounts that are in there, but the point is that it's, and you didn't have all these taxes and all these government agencies and all this other stuff that they tell us that we need these days, because the government was forced into monetary discipline because you had a fixed money supply. Look, there's guys out there, you just produce money and force into economic activity. Or there's other gold standard guys. I mean, look, a lot of these people are a lot smarter than me from the math, whatever, 200 IQ guys, and I don't know. But the point is that there needs to be a sound money system based on either industrial activity and or a gold standard, something solid that you use, and that's it. And you can't spend more than what you have. what the Federal Reserve System, the quote federal, as you mentioned, is not, it's private, and nobody knows who owns it. I mean, you can read any number of sources, it's J.P. Morgan and a combination of all these banks around the world, and Bank of America. Is it private individuals? Nobody really knows. I mean, I've read a lot of people, very knowledgeable on the subject. But the point is, it's privately owned, whoever owns it. Okay, and as I just mentioned, there's no reserves. But the point is that what it does allow is endless government spending, undisciplined government spending. So if people are sitting around and scratching their heads, and today's a perfect example, and I'm amazed. I would be amazed if a lot more people didn't start to wake up and start scratching their heads and say, "Wait a second, what the blank is going on here?" I said, "Where's the federal government getting all this money from?" I mean, you go into Times Square and you can do this. I don't know if you've been in New York City. I mean, I've seen it. You walk in Times Square, you can stare at the debt clock, and it keeps going up. And then all of a sudden, now the government's going to send, the quote government's going to send everybody in the country, $2,000 or $3,000.
Yeah.
Where's that money coming from?
A
Oh yeah, we
trillion
borrowed
dollar
from
influx.
China.
Yeah, $1 trillion of
It's
influx. Yeah. Where was that
it,
trillion sitting?
but then and then you got to sit here and wonder. So over the last 20 years, it's just for example, how is this government able to float a tremendous welfare state, endless wars amongst all the other government programs and waste and nonsense that you hear about? How are we getting away with this? And the reason is because, well, we're living off past accomplishments. People still with the dollar, although that respect is evaporating quite rapidly. That's what's really maintained the strength, is the impression that we're America and the dollar is strong and everybody needs the dollar, and that's the whole Bretton Woods thing and this sort of thing. And that's basically it. So basically what I'm saying, it's blind faith, but really what the government's doing since the creation of the Federal Reserve System is literally creating money out of nothing. So in other words, the way the whole thing got started is, all right, Rockefeller and Morgan and Carnegie and the rest of them literally got on a train in secret, went down to Jekyll Island, drew up the framework for this. It got voted on, like December 23rd, 1913, I think it was, right before Christmas Eve. Most of Congress wasn't even present, so they passed it through literally in the middle of the night. 1914, we had the Federal Reserve System. 15 years later, we had the Great Depression. 107 years on, we're literally 100 to 200 trillion with a T dollars in debt to this thing. So what is it? And nobody really knows, but it's a monster. It's a leviathan. It's an octopus. It's sucking this nation dry. And everybody, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Even Rush Limbaugh, we need the Federal Reserve. That's conspiracy theory. No, BS, man. It's a system, and we can spend hours talking about this, and I'm just trying to give you the Cliff Notes version, but let me put it this way. It's mathematically impossible to pay off the national debt. And again, that's not conspiracy theory. That's just basic mathematical facts. In other words, if I'm the Federal Reserve and you're the federal government, and just go back to the beginning, and I lend you $10, now that's your source of income. Remember, we're off the gold standard. There's no, Congress is out, now using the quote Federal Reserve System. How are you going to pay me back? You can't. So next year comes around, you need another $10. You gotta buy your food, you gotta keep the lights on and all this sort of thing to make your car payment. Hey Chris, I got another $10 for you. By the way, the $10 I gave you last year, I'm charging you 6% interest on it, but don't worry about it. I'll just tack it on. Now you owe me $20 plus.
Well, that's like buying a house. If you ever noticed how you can pay off a $30,000-$40,000 car real quick, but paying off a home seems like it takes forever because of the way they compound the interest. It's just a different system.
That's what it is. In the Bible, it's called usury, okay? And God strictly forbid it for that reason, because you're controlling people, you're controlling nations. The Federal Reserve System controls the nation, because you can never pay me back. 10 years on, you owe me $100 plus interest. All right, Chris, good luck paying me back. How are you going to pay me? Well, you can make payments to me. All right, give me $10 payment. I'm talking conceptually, but this is essentially what it is. And after 100 years, now we're up to trillions of dollars. Now what's the government doing? They're borrowing from Social Security. You had this idiot, this Botox bimbo Pelosi, and people dumb enough to listen to her and take her seriously get what they're going to get what they deserve. But that's another story. But trying to tell us that how great Social Security is and Obamacare and also Social Security's bankrupt. I mean, how are they covering up the national debt? How is the national debt only quote 20 trillion? Because they're doing things, they're taking cash out of Social Security and using it to cover other expenses. I mean, but that doesn't eliminate the liability for future Social Security payments. So Social Security is itself is bankrupt.
But doesn't
So
that
that's
fall
why I
back?
say that.
I said, doesn't that fall back on our ignorance? The fact that we're so gullible. And I think it goes back into the education system. They don't teach basic economics in school. They don't teach, they teach math and teach algebra, calculus, whatever, but they don't teach basic economics from my experiences on how to truly manage things and not to get in debt. But I think the whole what I always talk with people is the whole game plan. It's almost like your credit score. Your credit, the more you put on credit, as long as you're making your payments, is there's that fine balance. Is your credit score goes up, and they get you on that roller coaster, that hamster wheel of, well, I've got to have something on credit, because they'll a lot of people, financial places will tell you no credit is worse than bad credit. If they can't look at see how you indebted yourself, they will not give you a loan, versus even if you made bad payments, they're more willing to give you a loan on that information. It's just, it's kind of mind blowing.
Well, that's why I'm just trying. I'm going underneath the surface of the whole thing, and I'm giving you the fundamentals. But you're exactly correct. And that goes back to the point I was saying before. It's mathematically impossible for individuals and as a nation. And again, it's just objective mathematical fact, like 2 + 2 = 4. It is a financial impossibility ever to pay off the national debt. And you're making a very interesting case or point about the education system. I was going to get to that. And a lot of people miss this. I mean, you have economists out there that are very smart, and people like Gerald Salenti, who I think is a great guy, and I have nothing bad to say about him, and others, and who focus on the Federal Reserve System. Very intelligent guys, but I think what a lot of these people are missing, Webster Tarpley, and there's a few others out there that I take my information about the economy or try to understand. And I'm not saying these are bad people. And again, these are bad people. I'm not saying it at all. But what a lot of these people are missing, that focus just on the Federal Reserve System, is they're not looking at the bigger picture. Okay, if you go back to the inception of the Federal Reserve System, there was something else in there called the income tax. Now, we never had an income tax that went along with the Federal Reserve System. So, in other words, they were creating money out of nothing. So basically, it's a nationwide hijacking. Is what it is. It's a political coup, because who controls the money controls the nation. So they control the money, and it's really literally a nationwide bank robbery. And it's who's paying this interest on the national debt. How was I getting paid? Well, the suckers, you and me, and people listening right now, through the tax system. And who enforces it? The IRS. Okay, so not only did they do that, they set up the income tax, but they also set up something called tax exempt foundation. Now, you may have heard of some of them. I mean, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I mean, talk about an ironic name if I ever heard one. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Ford Foundation. Okay. And then what they did is they took all these tax exempt foundations. And this is why if you read the mainstream news, and Rockefeller and Carnegie, they're called them philanthropists, because they funded education. Well, they funded education for the reasons, the exact reasons you just mentioned a few minutes ago. They want people dumb and ignorant and divided. This is all this woke crap and all this, you're a racist and listening to conspiracy, because the people in charge want us divided. They want us at each other's throats and blaming each other and pointing fingers at each other, instead of, if we all came together under a system of organized religion, like the Christian religion in this nation, as our founders prescribed from the founding. They don't want that. They want division. They want atheism. They want Darwinism. They want stupidity. They want us listening to the quote experts like Paul Krugman of the New York Times, who comes up with with brainiac quotes like, you have to go into debt to get out of debt. I mean, what a moron, Paul Krugman, right? Mr. New York Times himself. To seriously, but because he writes, he's part of the establishment, he works for the prestigious New York Times, he must know what he's talking about. No, he's a moron. He's, you have to go into debt. But just think about that, okay? And that's a prime example. And who originally owned the New York Times? But David Rockefeller. So they took over the education system. So now that answers the question is why, so many of these colleges and these college professors are liberals, because they're sucking at the teat of their mother pig or their mother cow or the udders of the tax exempt foundations. Okay. This is why they're so liberal. This is why the New York Times and the media is so quote liberal, because they're all taking money. They were all educated at Columbia and all these other in the Columbia's teacher college. They disseminate teachers all of colleges and universities and high schools all over the nation. That's your answer why they're so liberal. These people are, Lenin called American liberals and progressives useful idiots for that very reason. I mean, these people are so stupid. I mean, they hate capitalism and what is your very lifeblood? What is your existence? Whose udders are you sucking for your milk, for your financial milk? The tax exempt foundations, the richest people in the world. I mean, how stupid can you be? That's the panoramic of the quote conspiracy. But I mentioned Paul Krugman before. The only way he gets away with saying something so stupid is because the Americans are dumbed down. The education system, you're not allowed to talk about this stuff. The only thing we hear about the founders in this nation, and I'm not saying they were perfect. I mean, I get it, slavery, and they weren't perfect, and they weren't all slave owners, by the way, but we can talk about that another time. And Washington's, there's other side to that story, but be that as it may, there were some, okay, they weren't perfect. They were imperfect men, but this is the reason why the founders get lambasted in today's so-called educational system. Our controllers, they don't want us looking at what the founders really were saying and what they warned against, which was the very central Federal Reserve Bank, which was known as what did they call it? They called it the central bank. Remember, if they still teach this stuff in history, which I doubt, you had Jefferson, no central bank, and Hamilton, who I think was probably a sellout, to the bankers, but who wanted a Federal Reserve Bank, and it was back until it got chartered, didn't have a charter, and Andrew Jackson got rid of it, and then it came back in 1913, as we discussed before, to the current system that we have now. But just getting back to the point, this is the reason why they have to attack the founders and the foundation of this country. They were slave-owning white racists. They were stupid and this and that. But where's this all coming from? It's coming from the same people who want to get rid of the system, because if people thought, hey, wait a second, the Constitution says, this Federal Reserve System, imagine if, students actually don't say, wait a second, what is if they started, 50 million people around the country started asking, say, wait, where is this in the Constitution? The response you get is, oh, they're just written by white racist slave owners. You don't listen to them. That's because that's how they ask.
Yeah.
People are saying, well, how do they get away? That's exactly how it's not hidden.
They try to make you uncomfortable.
Right? It's in our face. It's in our faces, and very few people see it.
Yeah, well, they try to make you feel uncomfortable so you don't ask the question, so whatever that way is. And you hit on a few different things as far as our founding fathers and whatnot. And I know it was on the cover of the book you showed me earlier, but what do you feel about a lot of these so-called secret societies, the not so secret societies? You had the Skull and Crossbones, you have Freemasons, you have all the different ones. Do you think they truly play a part, or do you think that only the top tier of those groups play a part in controlling this stuff? I know for the Skull and Bones, supposedly most of our most recent presidents have been through those organizations. I don't know how many, but quite a few in the 80s and 90s anyway.
Well, that's Skull and Bones is the American version of what was known as the Bavarian Illuminati. Very quickly, Illuminati as an illumination, and your eyes shall be open, you shall be as gods. It mean that literally. You could look at it above, just look on the back of your dollar bill, and there's your open eye. It's symbolized illumination. So there's definitely at the top. There's definitely that control structure of those bankers I mentioned. Some of the names I mentioned before, and the means and how they control. We discussed, by controlling the education system, the media, like the New York Times and NBC. And obviously the economic system itself. So it's a multi-pronged. It was a multi-pronged takeover. It wasn't just the economic system. And then who's controlling it? Yeah, the criminals, the genocidal maniacs at Skull and Bones. I mean, I call them the un-American genocidal complex, and again, I do that for the reason. I mean, these people are bloodthirsty maniacs. They're megalomaniacs, uh, evil that can only be ascribed to the father of lies himself. Now, you get down to the lower levels and the Freemasons, and I know, you watch the History Channel and you get the Freemasons. Oh, that's conspiracy theory, and people like me are nuts. And whatever, that's fine. Just if you think I'm not, just look at the back of your dollar bill and whatever. And what I just discussed, their instruments of debt and whatever. So, make that decision for yourself. But I'm not saying all Freemasons are evil. I mean, you drive through every town, and most towns there's a Freemason, temple, and they, and they, uh, they all go there. Excuse me, let me just turn this thing off real quick. Um,
I think by the time
um,
it gets to your local lodges, I think it's pretty watered down as far as.
well, that's exactly correct, Chris. It is and I've done this. I mean, I stopped in the Freemasons. I had some kind of open house, and I just stopped in out of curiosity, not knowing what I know. And I didn't go in. I wasn't disrespectful, but I just, these are guys just like us. That want to get out of the house. I don't know, get away from their wives, or whatever. For the night, hang out with the guys and play cards and drink beer and that type of thing. And they do a lot of good things. Shriners, hospitals, and I'm not taking that away from them. I don't want to be very. A lot of them are just regular people like you and me. They that's the club they belong to, and that's fine. But I went in the hall, and I still found a lot of the symbols and a lot of the esoteric, the Greek mythology and Roman and Babylonian Egyptian mythology, the Eye of Osiris and all this other stuff, the capitalist pyramid, the illuminated eye above it. I mean, it's kind of sitting on the sides, and I just out of curiosity, I asked a few questions, and these guys didn't have a clue. They don't know what the organization really means and its origins.
Mhm.
And I went to Washington's. Same thing, there's a big, I think it's Alexandria. There's a big Masonic temple, and you got George Washington sitting there. And yeah, Washington was a Freemason, but even according to the Freemasons, he didn't really take it that seriously. I mean, he kind of belonged because it was an organization. A lot of people did, and I'm not one of these guys that says, "Oh, the founders were all Freemasons and they're part of the conspiracy." And I know there's conspiracy kooks like myself to disagree with that. No, they were just part of an organization. And what I'm saying is 99% of the organization are just people, okay? But what it did is it served as a framework for people to enter and use as cover, and of course use the symbolism and, and, and and go up levels, and you only get up levels. You got to be a certain trusted, few that go up to the upper levels. And of course, when you get to things like Skull and Bones at the top of the pyramid, then those are the ones. Those are your CEOs. Those are your presidents. Kerry, Bush, William Taft, many of the CIA. I mean, the CIA, the name CIA, known as spooks. The origin of the term spooks comes out of the Yale Skull and Bone Society, because their tomb is called the tomb. Okay, because people literally go into a coffin and they have a born again experience, which isn't the born again of John, John and Nicodemus in John chapter 3. It's not that. It's the born again of going into Mother Earth, or the Earth Mother, or the mother of harlots, or the whore of Babylon. Coming out alive is now you're beholden to your Father, which isn't the Father in heaven. So that kind of narrows it down a bit. You know what I'm saying? So there you see what I'm talking about, the satanic conspiracy. But out of Skull and Bones, you have the most powerful industrial leaders, very powerful senators, Federal Reserve types, and of course presidents. And that's just a historical fact. Okay, and again, the Skull and Bones Society is the American Illuminati. If you go back into history and you look at the Illuminati, they were formed in, I think it was Bavaria, which is part of Germany, May 1st. Okay, just as an example, let's just talk about May 1st real quick. May 1st, 1776. That's a very interesting day. It just so happens to be halfway between the spring solstice and the summer solstice, okay, in honor of the sun god and his wife, the whore of Babylon, or Isis, or Mother Earth, or Gaia. Today I come to listen. We can spend hours talking about that whole movement, that nature worship. But anyway, so that's the origin of it. May 1st. I mean, what else is May 1st? It's World Workers' Day. It's a big holiday in communist countries, and Russia used to celebrate it. I think they called it in Russia So you got the Foundation of the American, or the Bavarian Illuminati. It's World Socialist, World Workers' Day. It's May Day in Russia. So it's a big May 1st. And was it also, in these nature worshipers in places like, out in Nevada, this Burning Man and these weirdos, these nature weirdos over in England, the Druids still today. It's also called Beltane, okay, May 1st. So you can, just by looking at something like that, you can see this alignment of this top-down devil worship from our so-called leaders all the way down to these Gaia Burning Man nature weirdos. Now, Burning Man, what is that symbolic of? Well, that goes all the way back to Baal of the Old Testament. What did people sacrificing their children to Baal, lighting a fire around them to the point where they would literally throw their babies in alive to burn them because they didn't want them, or to sacrifice them to the sun whose name was Osiris, okay, who also was represented by a certain all-seeing eye above a capitalist pyramid. So you could see where all these things start to connect, and I realize I'm talking a very broad brush, and this is kind of the Cliff Notes version of the quote conspiracy. But when you align all these things up, you can see how pervasive and how deep this whole thing is. So are we controlled? Absolutely. Okay, just kind of bring it up to today, and I guess we can start bringing this thing to a close before people start to fall asleep. I don't know. But, to bring it up to today, to Donald Trump, I mean, Donald Trump's problem, I'm not trying to deify him. I'm not doing that at all. But Donald Trump is not part of the quote conspiracy. This is why, in other words, the president is supposed to be like Bush, like George Bush, first or second, pick either one. He's supposed to be kind of like a putz, gets involved in a couple wars we don't belong in, pretend he's a conservative Republican, do a couple things, but don't really do anything serious. And then you're supposed to get replaced by, the opposition Democrat, the Clinton and Gores and Obama and this sort of thing. And then just look at the 2016 election. It was really supposed to be Bush, that deadbeat, another Bush, well, you're the Republican, or Romney, you're the quote Republican, versus Clinton. It was supposed to be the red carpet was being rolled out for Hillary Clinton is what it was. And that's why she's so mad, because she's another megalomaniac and a baby killer, like we talked before. But the point is that the president is not supposed to be, he's not supposed to take his job seriously. He's supposed to be groomed for the job and not take the job seriously, and just really supposed to be the demoralized people, just like all these Republican or Democrat. It's, you switch parties and people get mad. Oh, the Democrat's not doing anything, we're going to vote Republican. 8 years old, Republican's not doing it, we're going to vote Democrat. I mean, how stupid is that? Talk about the textbook definition of insanity. Okay, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I mean, if you vote for Bush, then Clinton, then Bush, all right, then you snuck Obama in there. Okay, but Clinton was still kind of hanging around, and Obama's a whole story in himself. But and it's back to Bush, Clinton. I'm like, are you serious? Like, these people, you know what I'm saying? Like, are you serious? And so enough people in this nation got PO'd enough to bring in Donald Trump, an outsider. Donald Trump is trying to take his job seriously. He's trying to take on the Federal Reserve System. Okay, and just to talk about that real quickly. I mean, at the beginning of his presidency, I don't know if it's still there. I mean, Donald Trump hangs a picture of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office. Now, what signal is he trying to send there? I mean, Andrew Jackson was the last president to pay off the central bank or the Federal Reserve System at the time, back in the 1830s, and basically kick him out of the country. And they've always hated Andrew Jackson for that reason. And I'm saying Andrew Jackson was a great guy, I get it, the whole Trail of Tears thing. But the point is that Trump, by hanging that picture of Andrew Jackson, Trump is basically signaling, without saying it, because he can't come out and say it, because they really will call him crazy and a conspiracy theorist like they do people like me. But he's sending a signal. He's saying, I know who you are, and I'm coming after you. So I think a lot of the vitriol and the hatred of Trump is they just hate him. But the establishment that wanted to put Hillary Clinton in as president, that had her groomed for the job, and Trump came in and upset the apple cart, barely, albeit, but he did do it. This is why they're trying to get rid of him so desperately, and they're so desperately trying to get rid of him before he keeps exposing them. I mean, the whole Mueller investigation, the Hillary Clinton email, the Hillary Clinton uranium one, this Epstein pedophile, all this stuff starting to come out. Okay, and Trump was exposing because he's not beholden to these people, and they don't like that. Okay, these power people, these are megalomaniacs. Remember,
Hmm.
this is why they hate Trump so much. Okay, and the last president to take the job seriously was a guy by the name of JFK.
Yeah, we saw what happened to him.
Right, you know, he's killed by a he's killed by a bullet that, you know, that weighed more than the fragments found in his body, and found, you know, figure out how to weave and turn while it was in midair. I mean, it's like you have to believe in ray guns and Star Trek to believe the official story in the Lee Harvey Oswald uh, assassination, right? I mean, literally talking Newton's basic laws of motion and conservation of mass and things like that. I mean, none of them existed on November 22nd or whatever, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Those laws were all suspended. That's literally what you have to believe. But the point is that the message that they were sending to future presidents like LBJ, who brought us through, quote, great society, okay, which is nothing but a big welfare scam, and has done nothing but destroy mostly minority families by design, which is touched on before. But anyway, you know, send messages to future presidents: don't step out of line. Don't take on the Federal Reserve Bank. Don't try to pay off the national debt. Don't take your job seriously. We're gonna shoot your head off in broad daylight, and you're not gonna do a thing about it. And that's
Well, that's almost goes back to that Seth Rich guy, right? The whistleblower for Hillary Clinton, and
yeah,
he
yeah.
got
I mean, look, this
assassinated.
dude, yeah.
And they what they
I mean,
say,
I shouldn't laugh. I
they could,
shouldn't. I mean,
well,
it's not funny. It's like, yeah, what do you have? Like two bullets in his head, and then like they come out like two bullets in the back of the head, and, you know, he committed suicide. He shot himself twice in the head. You know, it's like it's, you know, Chris, it's almost like they're not almost. I think they are mocking us. They're looking at the population of America and
I'm
saying,
glad that you said that word, because people think I'm nuts when and there's certain conspiracy, you can go way down and almost get derailed on certain conspiracies, but there's certain things like Seth Rich, a guy. First of all, I don't know what he was thinking about leaving his house when you're about to expose, you know, one of the most powerful families in the country. But he goes to a bar or whatever, walks home, and supposedly, you know, dies by suicide or robbery. I think first it
right,
was
right,
robbery,
right,
I think they said, but his wallet was
right,
still with him. And then they said, well, it must have been suicide. And I'm just like, and the fact that people don't question it, that just don't question it at all. I mean, even the Jeffrey Epstein thing, you know, if you
right,
get a guy that is in jail for the crimes that he was accused of, and on suicide watch, you're telling me you left anything in that cell that he could commit suicide
right,
with? That I
right,
mean, I think my
right,
15-year-old son would have done a better job than that. You know what I'm saying?
right,
I mean, it doesn't
right.
make sense.
No, well, it doesn't make sense from a normal perspective, but if you look at it from the sense of what he knew and who he was going to start pointing fingers at, it makes perfect sense. But that's the thing of Donald Trump. And then he got Anthony Weiner's laptop. You got all that weirdo. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Talk about, you know, sending, you know, pictures of, you know, of his manhood to, you know, underage girls and all this sort of thing. You know, somehow that kind of gets buried in the news. But, you know, Brett Kavanaugh, you know, making stuff up about 30 years ago, the ridiculous stuff they're doing to him, you know, all of a sudden that's fair game. I mean, the double standards are atrocious, but there's a reason for that. I'm telling you, these people at the top, ultimately, they're weirdos.
yeah.
Not for not, they're cold-blooded killers. They're calculating.
Power corrupts.
They're power corrupt. I mean, if you look at Epstein, I mean, it's his island. I guess it was known as Pedophilia Island or whatever, the Lolita Express, whatever they called it. There's plenty of evidence there were underage girls. I mean, ex-president known as Bill Clinton was on this thing. So you got pedophilia going on,
We got
and
Prince
again, it goes back
Andrew.
Prince Andrew, and then again it goes back to, again, the Old Testament Moloch. I mentioned this before. You know, Moloch and sacrificing children to Baal. Let's just again, let's just talk about that real quickly again, because it all kind of ties together. I mean, you know, today, you know, we take our babies, we stuff them in biohazard bags and throw them on the roofs of buildings and call it women's health care. You know, in places like Oregon now, you know, they're starting to burn these things, or if they're not selling the body parts, or they're going to start burning them, you know, for quote green energy. Now, what they've done is taken a technological 21st century facade and they've put it over ancient Baal worship. Okay, so you go back to the Ecclesiastes, I think it's chapter 2. There is nothing new under the sun. It's the same thing, Chris. I mean, this nation is doing it, whether you want to hear it or not. So again, and I guess we'll just kind of start wrapping it up with this. It all goes back to the beginning. I mean, you think this nation or any nation's not capable of deploying something like the coronavirus on purpose to knock off hundreds of millions of people or a few billion people?
Well,
Look
thin
at
the herd, right?
right. Look at Genghis Khan. Look at Hitler. Do you think Hitler was how close to having a nuclear? Do you think he wouldn't have used it? Do you think he wouldn't have deployed a biological weapon in the United States if he had the means? I mean, look at Hitler. Look at the Battle of Britain, right? As you go back in the history, I mean, Hitler. I mean, he had England on the ropes, right? I mean, what cost him the Battle of Britain? Because he was getting PO'd that the Britain was bombing his city, so he said, "The hell with this fighting their air force. Let's bomb their cities," and he gave the RAF a chance to kind of reload, and they won the Battle of Britain. So the point is, the reality is that killing large swaths of a population, even your own population, I mean, German Jews. I mean, Hitler sent them to the and amongst, and not just Jews, but Indians and other people he didn't really like, Catholics and other people, sent 12, 15 million of them to the ovens, his own citizens. And obviously, we just mentioned, and the only reason he was contained by, the United States, obviously, and the other militaries of the world. But the point is that you can't tell me, I don't want to hear this whole spirit of man and humanity. Get the hell out of here. Humanity is perfectly capable of that. History has proven it again and again. And I think what we're experiencing right now is asymmetrical warfare. I can't 100% conclude what happened, but I'm 99% sure it wasn't some wet animal virus that just popped out of nowhere in Wuhan. I think the Chinese, it's some kind of asymmetrical warfare. The Chinese are sending literal human biological bombs around the world. I don't know. I mean, it would make sense. I mean, the Chinese hate us. They want our resources. So why not destroy our economy, get rid of 200 million of us, make the rest of us that are here slaves, and start sending over their own citizens and take over. When people say that's crazy, is it? I mean, look at Genghis Khan. It's just a 21st century version of Genghis Khan. I mean, you know your history, right? I mean, he was a ruthless SOB. I mean, that guy, I think he made it all the way to, to Southern Europe. I mean, just pillaging villages, killing tens of thousands of people mercilessly using the weapons that he had at the time. And I'm not picking on China. I'm a racist. As I mentioned, this is
It's just
ubiquitous
life,
throughout
yeah.
human nature.
Yeah.
It's and again, to wrap it up, goes back to the Garden of Eden. It starts innocently enough. Ye shall be as gods. But the problem is, if you take God out of the picture, and all of a sudden you fill that vacuum and you become God, and you decide who lives and who dies. You decide.
It's a pretty powerful feeling, I'm sure. Well, let everybody know about your books. You've got 4 books. So you got They Live, The Un-American Genocidal, and so you got 3 books. Pleased to meet you. And how can people find your books?
Well, again, the website is boxofsunglasses.com. It's all one word, and again, it's in honor of my favorite movie. I mean, talk about a movie that pretty much encompasses in an hour and a half everything we've been talking about. Is John Carpenter's They Live. Okay, the same concept, pretty much. And so the website's boxofsunglasses.com in honor of that movie. Here's the first book. Okay, this is They Live, and what I did is I embedded it in theory of evolution, because have no doubt, okay, evolution, it sounds innocent enough. This is where it all starts. You start with evolution, you get rid of God, and like I said, mankind becomes God. And what happens? You get Karl Marx, Charles Darwin. Okay, they were just big mouths. Then you get Mao, another big mouth. Hitler, another big mouth. Okay, Stalin, another big mouth. All evolutionists. But do you see my point? Look what they presided over. Hillary Clinton, another big mouth. Look at her with the abortion. Nancy. So anyway, this is They Live, embedded in the theory of evolution. Have no doubt. What's going on today started with evolution. Okay, and great society of the young. Okay, and I can spend hours talking about what that word really means. And that's, remember, LBJ, the Great Society. it's not meant to be great in the terms that you and I would believe it. But anyway, that's a whole. We can spend hours talking about that, and that's covered in chapter 3. And of course, you got the Federal Reserve Note, which you spent quite a bit of time talking about. You got the capitalist pyramid here. This is available for download on my website. You're on the honor system on that one. That's for a donation. And real quickly, the next book, The Un-American Genocidal Complex, okay, which covers the AIDS virus. I don't know if I'm holding on. I'm kind of looking at the screen and trying to do this. But anyway, there's your Georgia Guidestones, which we didn't really talk about. Okay, but they're covered in there. What I call the anti-10 commandments, right there in Elberton, Georgia, northeast Georgia. Skull and Bones, we talked about them. The American Illuminati, the 322 of the Brotherhood of Death. Okay, so that name should really tell you a lot. And of course, who facilitates it all? But the Rockefeller founded United Nations right here in my candidate for Mystery Babylon.
And for people that don't know, the Georgia Guidestones are how to restart humanity, right?
Yeah, I call them the anti-10 commandments, and one of them is, they sound good. If you read them, they sound good. But, things like, maintain humanity at 200 million people, and leave room for nature, and, don't waste your time with useless officials. And talk about useless officials, talk about the United States Congress. But again, it's the anti-10. If you read them, you'll be like, these don't sound so bad. Until you say, wait a second, 200 million people. Well, there's 7 billion people in the world. Those numbers don't jibe. So yeah, and they're etched in stone. March. By the way, let me just quick fun fact here, Chris. 322, and I point this out on my website in the book. See that 322?
Mm-hmm.
What is the founding date? If you go to the Georgia Guidestones, what's etched in stone on the ground? March 22nd, 1980, 322.
Wow.
Okay, which just so happens to be 30 years to the date. Exactly, but we can talk about that on a future show maybe, but that Obama signed into law Obamacare, and I have quotes on that, on what the takeover of the healthcare system. Lenin considered that very important. Let's think about it. If you take, in addition to the finance, which they already have, you take over people's health, what else is there to control? Right? Then you decide who lives and who dies.
Italy's doing it right now.
Yeah, you shall be as gods. It sounds innocent. You start there, or Darwin, and again, Charles Darwin. No, he was just a scientist, and it's okay. Look where it ends up, and then the final book. Pleased to meet you. Okay, and this kind of takes a different approach. I know people don't have a lot of time, and my websites, there's hours and hours and probably hundreds of pages of information. But what I've done with this book is I've taken a fictional conversation between Satan and a character known as O'Brien, who I borrowed from Orwell's 1984. And it's kind of an amalgamation of John Carpenter's They Live, and a couple of John Carpenter movies. Orwell's 1984, obviously. C.S. Lewis Screwtape Letters. I kind of threw all those things, those cons. And I got, Mick Jagger's Sympathy for the Devil. Satan's in there quoting, I wrote a tank in a general's rank, and I was there with Jesus Christ, had his moment of doubt and pain, and that's history, man. And it's, Mick Jagger, whether he knows it or not. And, so that's kind of where I got the title from. And anyway, I guess that'll wrap it up. But just to conclude, I'll go back to where I started on, and I'll shut up. But again, if this is too much for you to digest, that's fine, whatever. The most important thing is God's simple salvation plan. I don't know what else to say.
There you go.
I mean, it's in our face anyway.
All right. Well, everybody, if you get a chance, go to his Box of Sunglasses website. Check out his books. Rob, it was fantastic talking to you. If you'll hold on just a minute, let me get this music and we'll embed it out, and I'll talk to you off air just for a second. And everybody, if you get a chance, go subscribe. This is on all our platforms. We're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, all the different things. Please subscribe. Please let us know. Have questions, post questions. furloughpodcast.com@gmail.com. The Furlough Podcasts are at thefurloughpodcast.com is our website, but furloughpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions, you can leave comments on YouTube and all the other things. Rob, again, it was great having you.
Yes, thank you very much. Take care.